Well, it's time now for perspective. This February is Black History Month, and while the annual event gives people around the world the opportunity to learn more about slavery, the US civil rights movement, and the ongoing battle for racial equality, the question of contemporary Black identity is also front and centre of events marking the occasion. My guest today is New York-born photographer Rebecca Arthur, an American living here in Paris on a year-long grant. Her exhibition, Reimagining the Black Identity, opens today at the Fondation des États-Unis here in Paris. Thank you very much indeed for coming in to speak to us here at France 24.
Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. So could you just start by telling me about the inspiration behind the photos that appear in this exhibition?
Definitely. So I've always been interested in storytelling and using my photographs to highlight Black identities and Black people, Black families and such. And so I wanted to come to France to photograph Black people here. And so these are people that I photographed over the past 4 months. And I met with them and had lots of coffee dates and such, and was able to kind of go into their homes and learn a lot about their stories. And I'm very happy to have them exhibited in my show.
And how did you find these subjects? How did you convince them to let you into their homes?
So I live at the Fondation des États-Unis, and the director there kind of put me in touch with some people. I'm not very good at French yet, so I can't really go into the field as much as I'd like to, but these people were very glad to speak English with me, and they have connection to the Fondation, and they've worked there, have connections through Paris College of Art, for example, and one of them, Kevin Jonah, he was actually interviewed here as well. I kind of found him on Google, and he was able to let me go on a tour with him. So it's a mixture of mutual connection as well as just finding people online.
So you are, as we mentioned, American. What, in your opinion, are the main ways that French Black identity differs from American Black identity? It's a big question, I know.
Yes, wow. Well, the interesting thing about France is that, you're not allowed to use race in the Constitution. You're not allowed to ask about race on the census, which I thought was very cool when I was originally applying to come here, and that, you're indivisible and you're one nation, and in some ways America is the same way. But I feel like we have a little bit more confrontation with our racial history. And so coming to France and learning a lot about the Black people here and their stories, they don't really have as much confrontation or really an opportunity to come to the forefront and speak about their stories. So it was kind of my way of using my camera as a lens to peer into their lives and bring their stories to light.
I might be misinterpreting what you're saying, but would you say there's possibly less racism here in France than in the United States?
I think so, but I definitely think that there isn't as much conversation. So I think having that conversation is very important. So in a way there's less racism, but I think there's things that aren't being spoken about that are important to, identifying as a Black person that I'm trying to kind of peer into and bring to light.
Because you mentioned it with the French census, it doesn't actually ask your race. So the French state has very little information about what race people are, but also what certain races are doing, what sort of education they're attaining, what sort of things they're doing with their lives.
Yeah, exactly. It was kind of my interest in coming here. I wanted to see how that worked in France, and I think it's very interesting in that, everyone in France is very like one nation, we are one people, and I think that that's very important to me. As when I came to France, it was the first time I kind of identified with my American identity for the first time. When I was in America, it was like, okay, I'm Black and that's it. And then I came to France and people didn't really ask me about my race much. They just said, what's your nationality? And I said, oh, I'm American. Oh, yeah. And that was a big moment for me.
Was that a positive thing for you or a negative thing? How did you feel about the way you were starting to feel about yourself here in France?
It was both positive and negative. I mean, negative in the way that for the first time almost ever in my life, I I realized that I was an American, and coming here, this was my first time coming to another country, and I decided to live here for 9 months, which was a pretty big deal. And so I spent a lot of my time kind of just figuring out who I was in this new place, and I went from calling myself an African American to a Black American and then just American, and that's something totally new for me. So while I'm talking to these people about their stories, I kind of had to reflect on my own self and figure out how I wanted to identify and come to these people and share my story as much as they were sharing with me.
And has anything particularly surprised you about the way race is approached, is dealt with here in France?
I think, you know, it's kind of just on the back burner a little bit. Like I said earlier, you know, everyone here is one nation and we are French, but and it's nice to kind of walk around the street and not feel like I'm being discriminated against or looked at weirdly because I'm Black, and I feel like in America, oftentimes, you know, I'll be in situations where I find people staring at me or people treat me badly, but here I kind of don't have to worry about that at all, which is sad in some way, but also a little bit great. So I'm also trying to figure out what that means to be away from my home country and feel more at home. You know, France was a mecca for lots of Black artists and writers, James Baldwin, Richard Wright, and so I'm kind of trying to rewrite that story of their journey 70 plus years later.
So the question of racial representation is very much a hot button topic in the US. Do you think it's being talked about sufficiently here in France? Because there aren't as many Black news presenters, for example, politicians, as there are white news presenters, politicians. Is that something you think that French people have really come to terms with as much as they have in the US?
I don't know if I have enough to say that they have come to terms with it. I haven't been here that long and I haven't really been in the community, but just from the outlook, I think that maybe it's something that should be thought about a little bit more. I haven't really gotten into the conversation yet with any of my subjects about representation and how that affects, you know, how they go into the world. I mean, I know myself, I went to a mostly white school and I didn't see anyone that looked like me on TV. And then it wasn't really until I got to college that I said, oh, okay, I'm Black and I want to see other Black people on TV and I want to also be, you know, that person that is Black and can be the way that I am and be a representative for people in the arts. So I think it'd be something that interesting to look forward to in speaking with subjects and see how they feel about representation in France.
Rebecca Arthur, your exhibition, Reimagining the Black Identity, opens today at the Fondation des États-Unis here in Paris. I urge you to go and see that if you can. Thank you very much indeed for coming on to speak to us here at France 24.
Thank you for having me.